My name is Gerald Mead, and I'm a professor at Buffalo State College. This is a 30-year retrospective of my work. It's titled Assemblages by Gerald Mead because it includes collages and assemblages. And so assemblages are three-dimensional collages, and the intention of putting the show together was to show an entire path that my work has traveled through over the 30 years, and then also by taking works from 3 different decades, you're able to see how there are certain threads and techniques that I've developed that I've expanded upon and enlarged over the course of the years. So how some of the earlier work ties with some of the more recent work, and to show really an entire creative kind of exploration over a period of 3 decades. It is interesting because it spans really about 6 years. And this is a piece called Status Update. It was a piece that I had done for a member show at Hallwell's Contemporary Arts Center in Buffalo. And it was kind of the theme of the show was Status Update, and it was a take on Facebook updates. And so what I had done is I had been collecting, if you imagine over a career, you collect these name tags that are from different events that you might be at as an artist, as a curator, as a juror, as a presenter. So I just saved them. And so this was a way of introducing the show by showing all the different career positions that I've held over the time and various activities with my life as a curator. I was a curator for the Virtual Penny Arts Center in Buffalo for 18 years, and I'm a current independent curator. So I'm often called into jury exhibitions, to curate exhibitions at different spaces, and to exhibit. So that sort of is a little bit of a snapshot of a lot of different ways that I've interacted with the art community. The show from 1989. I had finished my undergraduate degree at Buffalo State College in design. I'm an architect. I had a degree in psychology and then an undergraduate degree in design. And so it began with photographs. So I had the addition of the photographs to textiles. So I was a design major focusing on fiber art. That was my concentration. And so the first 2 here have elements of fabric that I wove. And then I was given some photographs. And so what I did is I incorporated the photographs by tinting them a color to match and coincide with the colors in the fabric. And there's small print around them, little frames, and so they're somewhat simpler pieces. The other thing I should say is that I've made a conscious effort to hold back some of my own work. So I've had exhibitions, I've sold a lot of work over the years. Work of mine is in the collection of the Albright Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo, and the Eastman Museum in Rochester. But I made it a point to hold back, or in some cases even buy back my work, so I would have examples from my entire career. Photographs come from all different sources. This particular one here were photographs that were from an old yearbook. So I'm collecting a lot of materials for collage, old publications, books, periodicals, in addition to objects. And so what you see here starting is where I'm actually starting to put layers of things and marks so that you're actually seeing and you're looking through a number of different materials. This happens to be a stair runner that's over photographs that are from an old yearbook. Continue to use photographs, also found objects, materials I've collected, whole range, camera parts, things that I've from nature, different materials. So each of the labels for them all say mixed media and found objects, because it's a combination of using images, applying media such as acrylic gel media on top of the photographs to give them kind of a shine and a texture. And there's like a theme that goes. This one has to do, this is called it's called Stokes Pylon, and that is the shape of an Egyptian pylon, which is the entrance to an Egyptian temple, and so there's hieroglyphics that are around the perimeter of it. I'll often find three-dimensional objects that are just intriguing, and in some cases I don't even know what they're for. They're just unusual. This was something that was being discarded from a mechanical engineering studios on campus, and so what I've done is I've used the object itself, which is kind of mysterious. You don't really know what it's for. And what I've done is the collage part, so it becomes an assemblage. The collage part is located right inside here. So you're actually seeing, and essentially all of my work is very small. If you notice, once we've looked at it, they're no larger than 4 by 6 inches. So when I was doing textile design, we would show a large piece, the entire weaving, but then they would show the detail. And then it was the detail that really intrigued me, because almost I'm saying, well, here's what the piece looks like, but if you really want to see what it looks like, you have to come in close. So I've always worked very small, and I work at a reading distance. Materials are found all over the place. This is really just a discarded, found on the ground of, I think it was a packaging for some cosmetics, but it already had been weathered and rusted, and the small part in there was a frame for the called control eyes. What you see is a pair of eyes there, and then most of it's an inset where it came out of the, so it became kind of disassembling as you're looking at it. So this was a series I had done. I had traveled to Europe. The year was 1995. And I did a series of postcard collages that were mailed back to Buffalo. I sent them to a gallery, and I called them Assemblages, so it's a travel collage. And so what I did in the course of the day is I would buy a postcard or two, and then collect various things along my, wherever I visited that day. And so each postcard was a remnant or a record of what I had done that day. So this was a day in Paris. It shows ticket stubs that were collected around the base of the Arc de Triomphe. And the one down here is a small piece of bark that was, someone had torn off a tree that was just laying there right by the Seine in Paris. And so then I made the collage and then mailed it back to Buffalo Gallery. I even mailed back water from the Thames. It was in a very small plastic bag, sealed up with tape, and it actually made it through the entire trip. Another example of kind of an interesting object, this happens to be an old sort of binder, but I'm looking for ways to then create a collage or somehow change the object. In this case, use the object itself, the binder, which is all sealed, as a frame. And so I've carved into it, and this is an old lantern slide. So back before the time of using digital images, what preceded that were slide transparencies, which you'll see in some of the later works. But then before that was actually glass slides this large that would have been put into a larger projector and used for, this one actually came out of a group of engineering slides I had. So eventually I started to change a little bit. This is an example in the middle of one where I'm using that frame and collecting and using one of the postcards that I collected. This is called Capitals over Endymion. Endymion was a Greek figure that Diana, the goddess, had fallen in love with this mortal. And to make the mortal fall in love with her, she transformed herself into the moon. And so this is a painting that goes back to like the 1700s, but it has, a lot of my work has an art historical sort of bent to it, probably coming out of my interest in art, my studies in art history. Some of the other ones collect, maybe refer a little bit more to collage that would be considered more traditional. This one's called International Ties, and it's made from all international stamps, but in the middle it actually has cording and wrapping as if it was a package as well. So it's kind of taking the package and a letter and kind of merging the two. This one here is called Reception times 16. So being in the art community, being an artist, being a curator, you go to a lot of receptions. And so this is a slice of 16 different receptions with invitations, and then the ubiquitous thing that they have at all the opening receptions at art galleries is cheese and crackers. So in the middle is a little miniature cheese and crackers. So it refers to all of these receptions going to them, and then of course the reference to the art. So in 2006, I left my position at the museum, where I was a curator, and I went back to finish my MFA, Master of Fine Arts degree at the University of Buffalo. So when I got there, one of the first things I did was to get to know my other classmates. There were 8 of us that were in that MFA class. I visited each of them and asked them for something small from their studio that represented their practice, if they were a painter or a sculptor, or if they worked in found objects. And so each of these vials represents one of my fellow students. And then I asked them for their thumbprint. And so each one of the vials has their thumbprint on the outside, and then it's their initials and then their studio number within the art complex. So I called it MFA Class of 2008 Portrait. So it's a portrait of my entire MFA class. The small one here is one that there's an interesting story behind it, because there's a woman who sent me a postcard and then said, collage material, call me. And so I called her, and she said, I had 30 boxes of collage material I want to give you. And I said, oh, okay, all right. And I said, I'll get back to you. And she said, we better hurry. She was 95 years old. I went to her home, and she had 16 by 20 photo boxes, 30 of them stacked up, and each one labeled. Birds and butterflies, architectural groups, humor. This is the one that was labeled humor. And so it was just pictures of people that she cut out from different sources of people laughing and smiling. So what I decided to do was to essentially make kind of a core sample of that entire stack. So that's a 1 inch by 1 inch collage from the humor box. There's probably about 12, 13 different pieces of images that are on there. And then it's a 1 inch by 1 inch in a 12 inch by 12 inch frame, and I did 30 of them, one for each box. So it was a way of kind of like taking a dive into the entire series and representing what she had collected. And the one over here was a postcard that was left over that I didn't use during my European trip. And it's Prince Edward, and there's a small pencil there that's a fragment. It's actually a piece of a pencil from Buckingham Palace that you can just find in the gift shop, but it seems like it's an artifact that maybe belonged to him, and that's why it was special. Pieces here came from, I call them the stereoscope series. The stereoscope is, you see this double image, was held in a little frame. You looked at it, and because it was the distance, when your eyes saw the two of them, it merged them together, and it made a 3D image. And so that's the Arc de Triomphe de Carousel, and that's one of Niagara Falls. These were done actually a little bit of a different time between them, but there are two that follow that same format. So I would use images, a postcard. This is an Aikens painting that's on the bottom. I did a series of 4 of them. Each one had a waterfall, and then something related to some people that are swimming in that. And then this one here is the Arc de Triomphe de Carousel is in Paris. The Olympics were in Paris twice, and so I'm using kind of a double image, creating kind of a symmetry with the frame. Again, all found objects, found, antique little frames. This is probably the largest one. If you notice, we walked around, and everything is quite small. This is a large piece, and I had collected or had this embroidery hoop. This one's actually all about Niagara Falls. And so there's a device I had, a little box that I had found at some kind of thrift store of these really beautiful bright blue plastic discs that were used for recording like a dictaphone. This here is a map of the Niagara River as it comes to the falls. And then there are small rocks from the falls, and then kind of cascading down, is a slice of a piece of Niagara Falls. So there's a number of different references there to the Niagara Falls and to that area. This one over here, again, I had created about 4 of these. It's based on the Stations of the Cross. So there are 14 Stations of the Cross. This one is the Station of the Cross, that's the crucifixion. And so I combined it with other found materials, including this pipette, which again was another one that was discarded from the science department when they were getting rid of a lot of materials. These would fall really more into the category of assemblages, because they're 3-dimensional. This one uses fragments that are cut out from a book, kind of put into like a CD format. And then the one on the bottom was part of a series that I called the Discarded Science series. So I would buy these books that were science or science-related books, intrigued by the cover and the topography of the cover. So this one is called More Waterfowl, and so then I would actually transform the book into an object. One of these from this series is in the collection of the Eastman Museum in Rochester. So this one, there's a small level that's right here, and I'll ask people, what do they think the level is about? Why is it there? And they'll often say, well, because the birds fly straight, or the direction, or whatever. It's actually a lot simpler than that. This here, the title is called Waterfowl. So it's water, and then there's fowl. So it's really bird feathers that are kind of like a nest kind of collection there. Now, so this one here, this was a representation, a fragment of what I had done for my MFA thesis. So my MFA thesis was based on the whole group of all those 30 boxes of collages I got from this woman. And so what I decided to do was to, instead of taking a core sample, what I did is, in a sense, I took an entire slice that was half an inch wide, out of the entire archive. So this was, my exhibition was at the Anderson Gallery in Buffalo, and so it was 217 feet around the entire gallery. It was an upstairs hallway, and it was a strip a half-inch wide, about 7 or 8 feet for each of the boxes. And so there's a slice. What you're seeing on the left-hand side is birds and butterflies, and then the box labeled that, and then the box turns to Xmas. And so essentially the magnifying lens is what happens between those two boxes as it kind of transitions from one to the next. And that was an installation that did not have any finished framed pieces, so I later actually made smaller frame pieces that were based on that installation. The one on top, this is fairly simple, and you're looking at it at a distance, you may not know exactly what it is. It looks like it's, you know, a print of an old painting, 3 figures. You look closer, it's Adam and Eve, and then a gymnast. So this was done during the time of the Olympics. And so what I did is I intersected images of it. It's all hand cut. So whereas this can easily be done now with Photoshop and computer, my work is all hand done. The piece on the bottom here is, again, a little unusual. It's called Ian the Graduate. And so this particular piece is a student of mine was actually imprisoned for acts of graffiti in both Buffalo and Pittsburgh. And he was sentenced to like 3 years in prison. He served a year. But one of his conditions of parole was that he could not possess any art-making materials at all. No paints, no brushes, no spray paint, no anything. And he never graduated. So this was actually a mock-up that I had done. He's wearing a tuxedo, and it's a take on the graduation photos, right? But it's him taken in the studio, wearing a tuxedo. And then what happens is the photographers, they would have a contact sheet, and then back in the day, they would have a grease marking pencil, and they would circle the ones they wanted to cross out the ones that were not good. And so that, so I had him actually select, and then leave his thumbprint on the pencil. So it was a way of him actually kind of breaking parole that he really wasn't supposed to be in any art job. I'm returning back, and you can see when I get materials, I will have them, and it may be 5, 10, 15, 20 years before I actually use them or use them again. So this is another one that has that glass lantern slide in it. And I also had collected and got from an architect's estate a large number of blueprints. And so then I began to use blueprints. There's a lot of, if you can see, my work has a lot of structure, a lot of design, a lot of composition, and also a lot of layers. So this one here, you're seeing an image through the slide, through a piece of acetate, through markings, and then there's an image behind it. So there's really like 3 or 4 layers of imagery that's happening in there. And this is used as an image from athletics. That's a pair of wrestlers. So these 2 pieces here, now we're up to about 2017, 2018. I did a series called Mining the Archives. So I have a lot of material that I've been given or I've purchased over the years, collected. I've got files, drawers full of different material under different themes and categories. And so this was a way of me looking back into all those materials, including small artifacts. So this one here is about the Richardson, it's about Klein Hansen Music Hall. It's in Buffalo. So I have a fragment from the building, but then I also have pictures of it, other, kind of a floor plan of it that I was able to use. And then I selected small material behind it to kind of mirror or echo what was going to be inside of it. This little round here is actually a small filter from camera lens. I had a box of about 30 of them, so I was able to do the series. And then, let's see, the piece here, now we're up to 2018. I'm using, again, the blueprints, and now I'm using the slide transparency. So I think this is the only one in here where you see the slide transparency used, but there's, in one of the sculptures, there's another one. Then I guess the last thing we'll take a look at is this one here that is the most recent one. Okay? And so this is called H2NB. So a lot of times in my titles, I will give it kind of an enigmatic, abbreviation, so you don't really know what it's about. But over to the other side over here, you'll see that it's a slide transparency. So as I mentioned, I went to, and you see how sort of the cycle continues. I went to Buffalo State College, I was a student. Later in my career, I returned back and then became a professor. And one of my mentors when I was there was Nancy Belfer, who was a fiber artist. And so she had over time given me some small examples of the fibers that she uses for her tapestries that she makes, and also these assemblage pieces using fiber. So the slide up on top is the slide of the piece of hers that I actually own, and then on the bottom of it is these materials that she used in her. So it's really it's a homage to her, kind of a tribute. And this is the most recent one. This is 2019. This was done specifically for a show of women artists, and a way to kind of take me back. Now, if you notice, there's a lot of thread, a lot of fiber there. In my earlier pieces, I started out as a textile artist and using fiber, and so figuratively and metaphorically, there's a thread that goes through my work, which is often, if I have to say, there are two elements that do appear continuously. It's fiber or thread in some way, photographic imagery, but then also found objects that have an entire range. Sometimes they're related to photography, sometimes not. How the pieces start. So this is a good example of what starts it off, and often it starts with an image. So I'll find an image that somehow appeals to me, or it's kind of interesting, and there's something intriguing about it. And the image here is the rectangular image that you see behind. It was someone peering around a rack of meat. So it starts with an image, and then often I will then add other elements and found objects to it. So this one has elements of a side of beef that's in the middle of it. There's elements of flesh and skin that refer to a butcher shop. And then in the bottom, those are, because it's, again, a butcher shop related, the story in the magazine was about a butcher shop. So that I was looking for things that might suggest the meat hooks that actually used to hang the meat. And so then I'm looking for what kind of materials can I then find, and it ends up being a windshield wiper and tenter hooks that are like turned. So often it just starts with a photograph, and then I develop that theme around that. Whereas, like, for example, the Niagara Falls one. Niagara Falls is going to be the theme, and I've got this large blue circle, and so then I look for other materials, images of the falls, maps, other things that reinforce, and if I'm able to, actual artifacts, which would include the small stones that came from the base of the falls.
Objects.
So as a collage artist and as an assemblage artist, I'm always on the lookout for materials that are somehow interesting, that maybe are enigmatic, which means you're not quite sure what it is, which makes it even more intriguing. And I think art objects are also powerful signifiers. So if you go on a vacation and you maybe bring back a shell, that's just a shell, but that shell represents like an entire trip that you might have had in Florida. And that part of that was when I had done the ones in Europe, when I was collecting small fragments and objects, whether they be stone or a piece of wood or something. That's from that location. So by putting that in the collage, it actually represents not only just the place, but the structure, and even more so. I'm drawn to things that are art historical. I'm drawn to things that are scientific, that are architectural, and I think it's because I have an interest in art history and also in architecture and history in general. I think it's kind of emerging some of those things that have kind of an age or patina, or have a kind of a level of history to them because of their object form. Let's see. I think the most recent piece. So, what I'm doing, I continue to work in small format, but I'm now more recently working in series, where instead of making one or two pieces, I may be looking at it as a larger project where I can make 10 or 12 or 15. The most recent thing I did was during the quarantine, during the pandemic when it started, there was a challenge that was put out by an artist from Gallery Space in Buffalo, and the challenge was to do something creative for every day in the month of April. And so what I did is I had my father collected stamps, and so I had a big bag of canceled stamps internationally, all over the world. And so I made a collage out of each stamp, on the stamp. So they're actually quite small. And then it got put into a small plastic bag, and then they were all assembled together in the shape of a calendar. So it was a way of doing something creative every day of the month, which actually kind of returned me back to when I had done the project and when I was traveling in Europe. I was there for a month and creating one artwork every day. Again, just keep you, because then you're forced to not sort of repeat the same thing you've done, and you have to kind of seek different solutions, ideas, and also because I have a lot of all these small bits and pieces of things from pieces that I've made, past pieces, I don't throw anything out. It's a way of even using a smaller fragment or a slice from something, and it becomes something new because it's being combined with something